why did you decide to join the CCA state board in the role that you're in?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. One is, I am intensely interested in conservation and making sure that the marine environment stays healthy and viable, and we have, vibrant fisheries in the California coastal waters and offshore waters, for that matter. I believe in that. I believe in the principles of conservation. However, in recent years, the state of California has taken on, I think, what I would consider more of a protectionist philosophy about the marine resources. So rather than conserving our marine resources, they want to simply just lock them down and lock out access to anglers and others who really enjoy being out there catching fish and enjoying themselves. So, while conservation is in our very name, and when we believe in it, anglers were really the first conservationists. But we want to continue to be anglers too. We don't want to just sit, on the beach and stare at the ocean and say, "Isn't that great?" We are participants in nature. We are part of the overall scheme of things, and we are vital to, I think, to preserving the ocean resource. I shouldn't use that word. Conserving the ocean resources. We're vital to that because we want, our very existence depends on healthy fisheries.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've often talked about this thing between, the difference between preservation and conservation. Preservation is more along the lines of what the state of California is taken that path a little bit, and us as anglers and sportsmen and outdoor recreators, we tend to have to be on the side of conservation, which is also good too.
Yeah, it definitely is good. But we want to, there are relatively few people who are out there participating in ocean recreation. Anglers are one of them. And a lot of people just, like to go swimming, or they might go surfing, but we are active participants with the marine environment. And as such, I think anglers tend to treasure marine resources probably more than anybody else. If we don't have healthy marine ecosystems, we don't get to do what we want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when it comes to, we want to recreate just as much as anyone else. And, when it comes to our resources, it makes total sense. And for some reason, it doesn't make sense to other people outside of our groups, but it makes total sense that, we want to keep doing this for more generations to come. And I want to live to see my grandkids go and fish, and even beyond that. Why would we ever want to decimate it? It just doesn't make any sense.
No, it makes so little sense. And yet so it's the state of California right now that's kind of pushing anglers off of the water, but they're being funded by well-financed environmental organizations that are basically making heavy campaign contributions to politicians, to the governor, to people who are in a position to push an agenda that is clearly anti-fishing. So environmental groups are anti-fishing. That may sound like I'm just pulling that out of thin air, but it is not. It is the truth. They are anti-fishing. I've heard it from them again and again, and they are here to shut down fishing. During the Marine Life Protection Act implementation process, the MLPA implementation process, they told us that they weren't anti-fishing, but what we found out was the exact opposite. This was back 10 or 12 years ago, and what they did was create a network of marine protected areas along the coast that basically shut down fishing along about 16% of the coast is consumed by MPAs now. Well, what's going on right now is a process called 30 by 30, which my good friend Bill Shedd has called MLPA 2.0. and the movement is called 30 by 30, and it aims to close down a total of 30% of the coast to fishing by the year 2030. And it's only the second step in the process that I believe will eventually shut down the entire coast if we don't do something about it now.
So is that 30% on top of the 16% that's already taken?
No, that would be, so basically what you would see, Darrell, is you would see a doubling of the number of marine protected areas along the coast. So 16%, another 14%, we would see that would come to a total of 30%. And one of the big things that, and the state, by the way, this is headed up by the California Natural Resources Agency.
The CNRA.
And by its subdivision, which is the Ocean Protection Council. The governor signed, just by way of background, we should probably back up a little bit.
Yeah, well, let's kind of go back to how this all started. And that was back in 2020, which we had AB 3030, the assembly bill in California that basically sought to do this very same thing and just put it in law. And, head by yourself and CCA and others, we were very successful in defeating that. And it kind of just failed, it died in the Appropriations Committee way back when. And, I think CCA kind of led the charge on that one, built multiple coalitions, and we were successful in that.
Very much so. And I think I think we have to give huge credit to CCA California, along with its coalition partners. We got caught on that particular, on AB 3030, which was the Assembly Bill 3030, that has basically the same language as we're seeing right now in the governor's executive order. They really tried to pull a fast one on the angling community. They being the Representative Calra, introduced it during the height of the COVID pandemic, when people were more concerned about avoiding getting sick than really paying attention to bills going through the California legislature. So they passed it, and very quickly it moved swiftly through the assembly. Within weeks of its introduction, it had gone through two committees and was approved, had been voted on and approved by the assembly. And before we even started to get realize it was there. And then once it moved into the upper house, the California Senate, the state Senate, then we became aware, and we really mobilized very, very quickly. We, meaning CCA California, mobilized very quickly. We rallied anglers through public awareness campaigns, through the marketing committee. Our government relations committee moved swiftly to Sacramento to start discussions with senators about this bill. And we were able to generate a lot of public opposition to the passage of AB 3030 through our outreach program. It was so powerful. It actually made it barely through the first committee hearing in the Senate, which was the State Parks and Recreation Committee hearing, but not without a landslide of opposition, call-ins from anglers. I dare say,
I was
Chris,
on that call.
You were on that call.
Like 5 hours.
We were all on that call. It lasted. They had to cut us off because there was so much opposition in the call-ins. It was overwhelming. Despite all of that, the Water Parks and Recreation Committee passed it through committee anyway and voted it through.
Jim, if I remember correctly, back in 2020, one of the big oppositions and one of the key points to driving the opposition was basically how vague it was. I mean, it was just it was almost a couple sentences to where we want to protect 30% of all coastline or land, water, and ocean, I believe, by 2030. And that was it. They didn't know how they were going to do that. They didn't know what they were going to do that, how much it would cost, nothing, which ultimately led to the demise of that bill. But am I remembering that correctly, where it was just super vague, or we just didn't even know?
Yeah, there was no. It was startlingly vague, startlingly lacking in specifics as to how this was going to happen. And that's the problem with these things. That was the issue with the Marine Life Protection Act. It was very vague. And when it finally came to the implementation, environmental groups shanghaied the process, funded the process through the Resource Legacy Fund Foundation, and basically interpreted it the way they wanted to interpret it, without any regard to what angling groups felt how it should be interpreted. And the great fear was that the same thing was going to happen again in its implementation. The devil's in the details,
Yeah. And, when it comes to details, back then they were certainly lagging. And then ultimately, when that bill died, we enjoyed a victory for about 6 weeks until our governor signed an executive order implementing it anyway.
Right. It was, we were full. Our sails were full at that point. We had felt like we had defeated this thing, only to find out. I turn on the television and there stands Governor Gavin Newsom with Representative Cowra, who had sponsored the bill.
That's right.
To begin with, standing at a podium telling us all that he was signing an executive order asking that the Natural Resources Agency and the Ocean Protection Council implement the principles of 30 by 30. It had completely bypassed the democratic process. It was now an executive order, in my opinion, an extreme example of executive overreach. The executive orders are designed to be used in dire emergencies. If we have an earthquake or there's flooding, when we can't wait for the legislature to act, we need to move now because people's lives depend on it. This was not a good example of the use of the executive order, but he did it anyway. And he ordered that his agencies implement 30 by 30 as soon as possible. And, and then we were at it again, back to the fight.
Yep. Here we go. And I know back in 2020, during the height of the pandemic, I had remember specifically where they had, I think there was an issue up north to where they were shutting down fishing in a couple different streams and lakes and all that stuff, only because there were crowds gathering and whatnot. And I think that was misinterpreted by, basically anglers, because of how vague it was. They were assuming that all of sport fishing was going to be shut down. And I know Governor Newsom actually specifically called out the fishermen, saying fishing is not shut down. And he even said that he fishes himself too.
That's what.
Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. I do. I said, I remember. He says, "I love to fish." I don't really think he loves to fish. I really don't.
Well, I mean, if he said it, then I feel like we need to kind of take him for his word, saying, "Hey, if you love to fish, why are you, why is this process being implemented anyway? And if you so do love it, then what are you doing to protect it?"
Well, I know why. We all know why. What happened was the environmental groups that were behind AB 3030 and behind Representative Cowra, Assembly Member Cowra, were behind this. So when it was to ignore the will of the legislature and pressed him to institute these principles, and as Mark Gorelnik, the chairman of our government relations committee, said to me, it's the golden rule. He who has the gold gets to make the rules. And that's exactly what happened in this case.
That does make sense here in our wonderful state of California.
And what's interesting is the language that was in AB 3030 is almost exactly the same as the language that has emerged in this document called Pathways to 30 by 30 that was written by the government agencies in charge of its implementation. It is almost exactly the same language.
Well, let's kind of fast forward to today. I mean, I know the governor issued that executive order back in 2020. And up until this point, the people at the CNRA and everyone else had kind of promised us a seat at the table, saying we would be involved in the whole process and all that. And in reality, I think you would have to agree, Jim, where conservation, it sounds like a good thing. It's a good idea. We want to do it. However, it's the implementation part of that where that's where it kind of rubs a little bit.
Yes, definitely. That's exactly what's going on. We know, to reiterate, we know that the forces behind 30 by 30 are using it as a tool to shut down coastal waters to fishing. They got 16% back 12 years ago. They're doubling down. They're going for a total of 30% this time. And who knows what will occur in the future? They eventually they're going to ask to double down again, and we'll lose more than half of our coastline to fishing. And the thing is, they don't want just any areas shut down to fishing. They want the prime habitats shut down to fishing. We've seen that with the MLPA implementation. The marine protected areas now that exist. And by the way, California has the most extensive network of marine protected areas in the world.
The most regulated in the world, yeah.
Right. It's put the state on the top of the leaderboard in terms of numbers of marine protected areas. But what they want to do is they want to just use this as a tool. They say, they won't say this, but I've heard it behind closed doors and in conversations with people that are heading up government agencies that, in fact, they don't want fishing to take place in any of the new 30 by 30 areas. It will be, and this is no joke. If that occurs, we are going to lose so many prime fishing areas. It will change fishing, recreational fishing as we know it. The fate of recreational fishing really hangs in the balance of whether we are successful or not successful here.
Well, also to give perspective too, to give perspective, it's almost like that 16% sounds like a small amount, but if you look at the map, it represents a big chunk of the coastline here in California. But also there's a stat where that 16% actually basically accounts for 50% of the fishable, quote unquote, fishable waters here in California. Adding another 14% on top of that 16%, I mean, that's got to be detrimental, where it's like basically all of coastal fishing in California is going to be shut off if this thing goes through.
Yeah, it's they don't want the mud flats. They want prime areas along Point Loma, La Jolla, Laguna Beach, Palos Verdes, up around Point Doom, and all that prime rocky habitat where we love to go fish. A lot of it catch and release fishing for calico bass and rockfish and yellowtail and barracuda. Those are all that's the kind of habitat you fish. You don't always go out on the flats and fish for sand dabs. So I was talking to my good friend Ben Seacrest from Accurate Fishing Tackle last night, and he tells he used to be he said he was one of the best calico bass fishermen in California, Southern California, for sure. He won tournaments. He caught big fish, and it was all catch and release fishing, by the way. Mm-hmm. And he said when the MLPA was implemented and the MPAs were set up, it basically shut down 90% of the areas where he fishes calico bass. So that, to your point, they're not just taking any areas, they're taking the best areas away.
Yeah. And, when it comes to, you just brought it up yourself, especially right now, nowadays, where you have a different, I'll call it a breed of anglers, to where, especially, for bass fishing in general, a lot of these guys who love bass fishing, yourself, myself, Darren, everyone else, everyone who's pretty much part of the bass fishing circuit and all that, I really don't know too many people who still keep calico bass. It's pretty much all catch and release.
Yeah, no, it's there was a time when, in my early days, when that catch and release ethic did not exist, but it certainly does now. And I don't I haven't killed a bass in probably 30 years. I
Yeah.
do love catching them. They're fun. They're beautiful. We take beautiful pictures of them, but in terms of killing them, I can't bring myself to do it. I couldn't. I just couldn't
Well,
do it.
yeah, and knowing what we know now about the bass specifically and how long it takes to grow to a legal size, and obviously the change, the reg change from 12 to 14 inches, that's got to be helpful too. I mean, there's bass everywhere. It's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, and the bag limits have been
Mhm.
reduced. So that's the other thing. I guess that brings me another point that brings me to California, back to California. California has one of the most well-managed fisheries, has the most well-managed fisheries in the entire United States. Our fisheries management in the state of California it leads the world. We keep a very, very close tab on fisheries and make adjustments when that's necessary. We're seeing it right now with the rockfish seasons being shortened. We may not necessarily like it, but you know what? If that's necessary, anglers accept it. We're not fighting against the shortening of the seasons or the reduced bag limits. We're saying, okay, if that's what we need to do to preserve good rock fishing, we will do that. But 30 by 30 fails to recognize any of these management legitimate conservation measures. They don't consider it at all. 30 by 30 does not recognize it. Neither does 30 by 30 recognize um, uh, what I want to say. It does not recognize the influence of pollution due to urban runoff and sewage spills. It does nothing to try to cure some of the things that are really, really bothering our ocean environment right now. They don't. It says nothing. There's no language in 30 by 30 that addresses these issues.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'll take it a step further there. The last, say, 30 years or even beyond that too, the angling community, the sport fishing community, and especially here in Southern California, we do a lot of good for the community in the form of taking plenty of kids out fishing. That's why Friends of Rollo exists and is successful year after year after year. We take a whole bunch of vets trips as well that we started here in at CCA California with some of our chapters working with different other groups and all that stuff, taking vets out fishing. All really good stuff, trying to serve our underserved communities and just basically the community. And with 30 by 30 trying to be implemented, that kind of all goes by the wayside. Yet it doesn't address any of the bad stuff that's happening right now, right in front of our eyes, like sewage and other than that. And I think speaking for a lot of people out there in the industry, we still want clean water. We still want the beaches to be clean, and we do our part to go do those things. Yet 30 by 30 addresses none of that, the real problems.
Exactly, exactly. And to your point about underserved communities, I was talking to one of our board members last week, Daniel Tabor, and he heads up programs where, in conjunction with CCA California, in conjunction with the sport fishing landings, and in conjunction with Rollo, where he takes at-risk children out fishing, at-risk youth out fishing on these boats, and he tells some marvelous stories about how these kind of hardened youths that have become skeptical and and don't appreciate anything that they how can I put it, they're at risk.
Mm-hmm.
And he says he takes them out on the boats, and all of a sudden he sees this change in their demeanor. He sees them um, appreciate the ocean, watch the wildlife, the dolphins and the whales, and catch fish. And he says they come back changed individuals. He can see the change in them, in these kids. And he says fishing does that. Fishing is that kind of activity that it changed me at 5 years of age. I became completely hardwired to go fishing after that. And he sees the same thing happening with at-risk youth and the programs that he's undertaking. So to see that taken away, to see that some of them now, that's all they want to go do. They want to go fish whenever they can. They want to go fish. To see that taken away is really taking away access to communities that I believe really, really need to get out on the ocean and go fishing. And 30 by 30 is going to do that. It's going to shut down the opportunities for our underserved communities, for kids everywhere, to get out and go fishing and enjoy the ocean and marvel at how wonderful this is, and give them an outlet that may very well save their lives.